Hey there, this is Ill Factor from beatacademy.com. This video, I'm going to be sharing with you some music production tips while recreating Sunflower featuring Swae and Post Malone. So let's dive right in. Now, as I listen to the beginning of Sunflower, I'm immediately drawn to the drums, not necessarily the pattern, but yet the texture, the way they sound sonically. Very vintagey, from like an old vintage drum machine, and they have sound saturated and warm. So the purpose of this video is not necessarily to dial in the same exact sounds, preset, or patches that are being used, but more so I'm sharing with you my workflow and process of developing ear training. So being able to hear something and recreate it and get in the general ballpark. I mean, that's the purpose here. So focusing in on the drums, let's take a listen to the pattern. So here's the pattern that we have. Basic 2-bar pattern, and what we're going to focus in on is shaping the sonic state of these drums to make them sound more vintage and just overall warm and saturated. So when those words come to mind, when I feel or hear something that's warm or saturated, I'm immediately thinking of either an EQ and some, well, saturation or distortion plugins that we're going to be adding to these drums. So let's start with finding the right samples to begin with. So here I'm using a kick from a sample pack that I've put together personally from some of my previous projects. I'm going to get here. This is coming from a Beat Academy sample pack that I've put together, which you can download absolutely free, by the way. Just by clicking the link below in the description box, you can download this sample pack. It's yours absolutely free. And it's royalty free, so you can use it in your projects right away. So the kick is coming from the 04 Just Pop construction kit, and I'm also taking the snare from there too, as well as a couple other sounds from the sample pack. So we're all laid out here. Now what I want to do is focus on recreating that nice warm texture. So I'm going to use the onboard filter here. Now as you can see, the snare is a little too bright, so let's turn on the filter here in the sampler, and let's go ahead and dial that back so that we can shave off a lot of the high end. And then let's go ahead and actually crank a little bit of the drive as well. So I'll bring it right there. That gives it more of that vintage vibe. And I'm going to do the same thing for the kick. Lower the frequency. Because what we're doing is we're using a low pass filter here. And that's basically meaning we're only letting the lows pass. So just letting the lows pass, we're eliminating the high end here. And that's what's going to give it more of that warm feel. Usually when a lot of the high end is missing, sounds tend to seem a little bit warmer, almost like you're placing a blanket over them. And that's what we're doing here with some of these drums. So let's first focus on seeing how these sound like with the filters on them. Let me go ahead and crank a little bit drive as well on the kick drum. I'm going to do the same thing with this cowbell that we have going on. Now this cowbell I've taken from an actual folder that I have with some vintage drum machine samples. So what I'm going to do is take this cowbell, and when I listen to the reference, I notice that it's got more of a just more resonance to it. So I'm going to take the filter frequency, bring that down, and now let's actually use the resonance here. So we might have used too much filter cutoff. Let's go back here. And then let's crank the drive. And let me just open this up so you can see the balance that we have here, just setting a nice little balance. Then I'm also going to do the same thing with the tambourine. I'm going to shave off a little bit of the high end of the tambourine. So having a filter on the sounds really helped give it that vintage vibe, but we still need a little bit more processing to get to where we want to go. So I'm going to head over to my audio effects folder, and I'm going to start by adding some overdrive saturation. So I'm going to click the overdrive plugin, drag and drop that, and let's just go ahead and see what that sounds like. Definitely gives it that dirty, grimy texture to it. So let's just scale it back a little bit. Maybe just lessen the drive and maybe brighten up the tone just a little bit. This is without it. Really helps just kind of bring it alive. And then I'm going to use the Dynamic 2 plugin. Now, why am I using this plugin? There's a preset here called Hot Driven Tape. I'm going to use this tape saturation to soften a little bit of the harshness that the overdrive's doing. And if you're thinking, well, why not just lower the drive on one plugin? Well, it usually is a combination of plugins that can help bring and get the results that you're looking for, rather than trying to squeeze or get everything from just one plugin. So I'm going to use this Hot Driven Tape preset and see what it sounds like, and then go ahead and just do some tweaking. But I'm using this to soften a little bit of the harshness from the overdrive. Now we can hear it's adding a lot of that bottom end flutter to the kick. And if you can't notice it, then definitely put on some headphones. You can hear some of the subtleties that it's doing. So I'm going to lower the drive, lower the dry and wet a little bit, and increase some of the output. So this is without it. Cool, so it's really subtle, but I like the way it's softening the overdrive. Now once I have that in place, when I listen to the reference, I mean, those drums are really smacking, so I'm definitely going to get a compressor to get that across. And now in this compressor, let's start by having the ratio cranked all the way to, let's say, 7:1. And that's really going to help strengthen the compressor. And that's what the ratio is focusing on. The higher the ratio, the more strength you're putting towards that compressor, the more stronger the compressor will react. So let's lower the threshold. Let's get a little dramatic and start working our way back up. So I might just a little bit less of an attack, and I'll keep the release where it's at. Now let's get some makeup gain here. It's cool. So let's listen to what it sounds like without these. Yeah, that compressor is really exaggerated, and you can notice it in the beginning of the record too. So I love the extra exaggerated compressed drums vibe. And now what we're going to do is add another saturator. Another saturator? Yes, another saturator. Can't have too much saturation. And so here we've got a saturator, and this is really just to give it some more extra drive. Let's start at 5, and I'll lower the output just a little bit. So I think we're good. We're at a good spot here. I'm going to just grab all of these plugins, right click, and hit group. And that's going to allow me to just bypass all of them together by just bypassing the group as well. So let's just go ahead and do that and compare with and without it. So it's amazing what a little bit of processing can do to some of the drums. It really helps bring it to life. Now I'm going to head back to that Beat Academy sample pack and use a drum loop in that same construction kit and drag and drop it into the session. Now I want that drum loop to also be processed with the processing that we've done to the drum rack. So let's go ahead and group the drum rack and the drums holding shift and hit Command G. Now it's grouped the drum loop and the drum rack together. Let's go back to the drum rack, take the sounds that we were using to process, or the effects really, and now it's processing both the drum loop and the drum rack together. Cool. So now let's focus our attention on the bass line. Now when I listen to the bass line in Sunflower, it definitely has that similar vintage feel to it. I'm thinking 80s synth, so something a little bit brighter, not just a subbier sine wave or even a triangle. So for this I'm going to use Ableton Live's wavetable, but feel free to follow along on any DAW using any 2 or more oscillated synth. Click and drag, and now let's just take a listen to the bass. First I'm going to go to using a sawtooth and see what we have. Well, Got a long way to go. But the first thing we need to do is switch from polyphonic to monophonic. That way the notes don't overlap. And we can use a filter frequency to take a lot of that high end off, but yet add some resonance so that we get a nice little peak at a specific frequency. Now what I'm going to do is turn on oscillator 2 and go to similar. We'll go to the sawtooth, but we're going to detune this one. So I'll just go down a little bit and see what that gives us. Now I can go to the amp envelope and just lower the sustain just a little bit. Cool. And now let's go ahead and turn on the sub oscillator. I'm doing this so I can get a little bit more bottom end too. And what's really going to be helpful is turning on the unison. And this is going to give a nice stereo, more stereo depth here. So leaving it right at 3 voices and 30%. That gives a nice wider sound. But yet when I listen to the sound on Sunflower, it seems as if the bass synth has this little initial bite or this punch and then just gets darker all of a sudden. So we can use our second envelope to control our frequency filter. So I'm going to head over here to the matrix and we're going to go filter 1 frequency to envelope 2, and let's just send this up a little bit and see what that does. That's cool. That's what we're looking for, that initial bite, and then it goes back down. So going to our envelope 2, we might have to actually just tweak this out a little bit to see, and this was going to shape the actual response. So let's try that. Let's add a little bit of some filter drive on there, just to give it some saturation. Cool. And now I can go back and forth between the envelopes to just really just get this slope, maybe just a little bit more release. So once the note finishes playing, it'll last a little bit longer and just a little bit less of an attack. And depending on how open we have this the filter frequency, depends on how bright that initial bite is going to be. So let's lower this back down. So I might want to lower the sustain just a and raise the attack a little more. Cool. Now I have a reverb on my auxiliary B, on my return track B, so I'm going to feed a little bit of that reverb, a little bit of the synth to the reverb. And I'm also, you guessed it, I'm going to use a little bit more saturation on the bass, just a little drive here and lower that back, and use our EQ 8 to actually get rid of a little bit low end, because I can hear in the chorus of Sunflower a deeper bass come in. So we're just a little bit low end and highlight the specific frequency that we want. Let's see what that sounds like with the drums. So I might have a little, the sustain is just a little too low. So I want the notes to sustain a little bit more. Go back in here. So now let's add another bass, and this is going to cover the sub bottom end. So I'm just click this wavetable, drag and drop that, and I'm going to copy the bass pattern by holding Option and dragging that over here. And then we're going to make sure to use the sine wave, maybe even between the sine and the triangle. So it gives it a little bit more presence. And then turn the sub oscillator on. And go from polyphonic to monophonic. And give it some nice drive. Okay, once I've done that, I want to go ahead and change the pattern so that this bass line is really just playing sustained notes, and the bass synth is going to be playing this pattern that we're currently looking at now. So what I'm going to do is just simply go to, I'm going to leave the first note of each progression alone and just delete these over here, the notes after it, and just highlight the, we can delete these here. There you go. We're going to select all, just Command A and hit the legato button. So that way it's just playing the sustained note to the next note of the progression. So let's listen to both of them together. And then what I'll do is add just a little bit of sidechain compression. So I'm going to go to the compressor here and just have this duck, the sub duck a little bit out of the way once the kick, every time the kick pattern plays. So sidechain, kick, and now we can just add a little bit sidechain. Just helps, gives it a little bit movement and helps the kick just stand out just a little bit more. Now let's wrap this up by adding some chords in the background to just give some ambience and fill it up a little bit more. So I'm going to head back over to the wavetable, drag and drop that in, and instead of the dark subby tone and maybe something a little brighter like the sawtooth, let's go ahead and choose a different type of wavetable altogether. So let's try saw harmonics, and I'm going to go ahead and play some of the chords. So it's cool, and what we'll do is just take away some of that, some of the high end there. And I'll turn oscillator 2 on, and maybe this will have the sawtooth, but we'll just slightly detune this. I'll mix this down a little bit. I'm turning the sub oscillator. And let's try some of the shimmer here in the unison. And opening up the release so that the notes kind of linger on for a little bit. And now what we'll do is a little bit of effect processing. Let's add a reverb directly onto that and scale that back a little. So see what that sounds like with everybody back in. Well, I hope this video has been helpful, and there have been some tips that I've shared that can be really useful to you in your upcoming projects. And as my gift to you for watching this video, I'd love to send you the sample pack that I've mentioned earlier, highlighting some of the sounds that we use in the drums, as well as sounds that you can use in your projects. These sounds are 100% royalty free, so feel free to use them in your projects. It's filled with construction kits, one-shots, transition effects, and these are yours absolutely free. Just click the link below in the description box to download this sample pack and enjoy. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.